Hey guys, it's Alex. Today I wanted to share with you some of my favorite books of all time. I had two caveats when making this list, which was that first it had to be a book that I owned, so that I wasn't just sitting here talking about random books that I couldn't look at and hadn't read in possibly years. And the second was that I wanted to choose books from a variety of genres, so I didn't just pick one of every young adult fantasy series that I've read, because there are quite a few of those on my shelves. So I tried to widen the scope a little to hit the various genres that I read, because I do really love to read different genres. This is my favorite book list. I came up with 9 books, which is not all of my favorites, but it is 9 of the books that I love the most on my current shelves. The first is possibly the most obvious, Harry Potter. I love Harry Potter. I started reading it in, I think, first grade, and it took me all the way through the end of middle school. I just picked the first one, although probably the third one was my favorite, but this just represents the series as a whole, not this particular book. Because in all honesty, I probably could have had all 7 on this list. I love Harry Potter so much. Like, we all grew up with Harry. It's hard for this to not be the first book on my list. The second book is If You Knew Then What I Know Now by Ryan Van Meter. It is not a memoir. It is a book of essays about his life. So it's basically a memoir, but he prefers book of essays. A lot of it's about him coming to terms with his sexuality. It starts when he was a child and goes through his relationships and his teaching in college. But I think the first 2/3 of the book takes place when he's an adolescent. But this has my absolute favorite essay of all time in it, which is Things I Want to Tell You on Our First Date But Won't. I've read bits and pieces of this book so many times, even if I've only read the whole thing a couple times. The only complaint I do have and have ever heard about this book was that it's a little bit too relatable. Like, it tries to tell the universals, like Ryan Van Meter tries to tell the universal story a bit too much rather than telling his specific story. But even with that in mind, there's just so much that I love about this book, and I don't know, I'll just find myself grabbing it just to read an essay, any essay, by him. The next book is Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides, and yes, that is how you pronounce his name. I looked it up before making this video, because I've always kind of wondered if I'm saying it right. I was. But I love this book so much for the way it portrays the immigrant story, specifically Greek immigrants, and the way it takes place over generations. His writing style is amazing. Like, it's so detail-oriented, but all the details just, like, add to the story. Like, some writers get bogged down in too many details, but I feel like with Jeffrey Eugenides, it just brings the story to life so much. Like, I've only read this book the one time, because in all honesty, it's pretty hard to read. Like, all his stuff has been hard for me to read, but it's so worth it. I just adore him, and I love his books. In somewhat the opposite direction from Pretentious, I have Sarah Dessen, The Truth About Forever. I've read almost everything she's written. I think I've missed the last book or 2 of hers. But in high school and middle school, she was probably one of my favorite authors. And I love her sweet, romantic boy meets girl, and they solve their problems together and things turn out okay. And this is my favorite. Just Wes and Macy and their whole romance and their issues with their families and their pasts, and the way, like, I love her because it's not boy meets girl and boy solves all girls' problems. Like, they encourage each other to, like, work through their issues and, like, talk to people, like the way Macy and her mother have their relationship in this book, and I've read it so many times. Like, this is a new copy because I think I killed my old copy a little bit. But this is one of my favorites. It'll always be my favorite. It's just amazing. Like, if you like romance at all, any genre romance, and you haven't read this book, I highly, highly recommend it. Or anything Sarah Dessen's written. Like, you can't go wrong with Sarah Dessen. Another YA book, The Naming. It is the first in the Books of Pelennor series, which I have all 4, and I've read all 4. And I love them so much. Alison Croghan is an Australian author who I don't think she's as famous in America, maybe. I don't know, but I've never really heard people talking about these books very much, and I just adore them. I'm not usually super into fantasy, and especially not high fantasy, but she tells the story so well and just captures all the right details, and it does have romance between Myrad and Cadvan. Myrad is the teenager, and Cadvan is her teacher, which I know is sort of a trope that people don't like in YA. And I get that. I 100% get that, and most times I don't really like it either, but it has it here, and I think she actually does it okay. But these books, the whole series, is so good, and I think I've read through it twice, which, you know, they're all thick books, and it takes a while, but I love these. I don't remember how I got into them, but if you like high fantasy, you should check these out, because these are great. Another nonfiction book, the only not creative nonfiction book, is this Ladies and Gentlemen of the Jury. It's basically, it's the greatest closing arguments in modern law, and I don't know, I'm a nerd. I'm such a nerd. I'm not a law student, I didn't even graduate college, but I love this book. Like, it's fascinating, and it has the full transcripts of all these closing arguments, including Clarence Darrow. And it's part of a series. There are 2 more. There's the greatest closing arguments in civil law, and the greatest closing arguments in defense, criminal defense. It's fascinating to read. The others as well. I mean, I don't know what else to say about this. It's probably not going to fascinate other people as much as it does me. But, yeah. I don't know. I want to reread this now. It's so good. This is probably the youngest book I have on my list, but it's The Ocean Within by V.M. Caldwell. I believe it's technically young adult, but it's really young adult. Like, the main character is, I think, 11 in this. It's right on the edge between MG and middle grade and young adult, but I think it does fall squarely into young adult, and it's about a foster child who gets adopted. Well, she gets placed with this really big family, and she feels like she doesn't fit in because they're all super outgoing. And it's basically her learning how to be a part of the family, and just, it's a family story, and it's so good. Like, I read this when I was young so many times from the library that eventually my parents just bought me the book because I'd always ask to go to the library just to get this. There's also a sequel, which is called Tides, but I don't know. If you like younger children's books, I mean, not children's books, but because it is a little younger than typical YA, it's so good, and it's so fun and nice, and just, like, happiness. Like, there's some bad stuff that happens, but it's just a happy book overall. I don't know. I love it. I keep reading it, even though I'm 23, and that might be weird. It's so, so good. This is Love Affair by Leslie Kenton. I judged this book when I first bought it, because it is a memoir about the incestuous relationship she has with her father. And because it's called Love Affair, I thought it was going to be a very positive portrayal of it, and I thought it was going to be a hate read, but it's actually beautifully written, in the way that she deals with her relationship with him. And she doesn't shy away from the darkness and words like rape. Like, heavy, heavy trigger warning for anything in this. Like, I don't know. I love this. Like, I love the way she talks about it. And the way she writes is beautiful. She's a beautiful, beautiful writer. And she really does deal with, like, so many shades of gray. And, like, he's her father and he loves her. I mean, he's her father and she loves him. But at the same time, she hates him and condemns everything he did. And I don't know. This book was a shock to me how good it was. But I absolutely adore it. I have one more book. It is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. Everyone loves Gaiman, I think, if you like fantasy at all. It's basically a requirement to have read Gaiman. And I have the illustrated version of this book because I read it for a college course, actually. And it's just, you know, a fairy tale. Like a new fairy tale that he wrote. And it's so, so lovely. And he hits every trope perfectly, but turns it on its head. And it's an interesting story. And I highly recommend, like, particularly the illustrated version, not just the story itself. It's a fun read. You like fairy tales and fantasy. He really captures the new fairy tale really, really well. But they're beautiful illustrations, as you can see, like, throughout the book. And I feel like that makes it so much more than just the words. Like, this was meant to be illustrated. Those were my 9 favorite books that I own. Perhaps at some point I'll do another one of these videos with another few books. Because there are so, so many more that I absolutely adore and have read tons and tons of times. Bye, guys.